Hello guys and welcome back. So now we're going to set the solver for high-res quality settings and improve few options here to make it to make the sim look a bit more interesting. Now the typical workflow is that we have to do various sims to see how this looks, and for the sake of speed I'm not doing a lot of iterations, but I highly encourage you guys to cache every time you make progress or you have thought about what this does and what this option will do a cache with that option on versus off, or change the value and see which one looks better for you. I'm setting these up based on wedges that I have run already, and I'm giving you guys the final settings that I come up with for this scene. Each scene will require different options and various tweaks to get it to look right based on the forces that you have, the collision that you have, and various other inputs that will affect the sim. So in the flip solver, I'm going to keep the substeps as to the default. I'm not going to change that. There's one option under the particle motion that you guys may want to look into if you have more splashy particles, which is to set this under resolved particles to treat as ballistic. This will help with big splashes, or if you have particles flying far away from the main sim, this will help give those particles a more natural movement. In this case, we don't have any crazy splash, so we're gonna keep this as the default. Reseed, we're gonna keep this on. This option, Houdini, there's a static value or a predefined value of particles per voxel. There is a smoke sim, and each voxel has a certain amount of particles. As the particle gets infected, certain voxels will lose some points, or some other voxel will have more points. This reseed particle will try to readjust those points and their distribution so that it's uniform across the sim. And this is very important because if we have points changing count per voxels, when we mesh the data, it's not gonna when we mesh the points, it's not gonna give us a stable mesh. So it's very important to have this on. Particle separation, we're gonna keep this off, especially that the scene it does not have a lot of crazy motion or anything like that. Also, this is going to add an overhead to the calculation. What this does is particle distribution here is a key factor to how the mesh is going to look like. If there is a lot of noise, or if we have points that are stuck together more than the rest, the mesh generation is going to be really bad. And this and in the sim, during the process of the advection, particles can get clumped together or move closer to each other, but with a smoke sim, it tries to keep the distribution uniform and try to keep them apart, and have a uniform radius that separates them. This will enforce that separation. Okay, if you see issues, you may want to look at this, which will basically try to fix some of those issues. Droplet is something that we want to turn on, and the reason for this feature is if we want to, let's say we have particles that are getting separated away from the sim and they're just floating in the air, we want to be able to isolate those and delete them, or at least separate them so we don't use them in the whitewater sim, we don't use them in various other steps. And being able to control and isolate those, even deleting them, could help with the look of the sim. Because let's say we have a lot of interesting movements here, and for some reason we get a splash and one point is traveling here, but everything else is in space, is in a reasonable area, and then we have some floating points. Being able to isolate those and deleting them would make the scene will make the mesh look more interesting. So this is what the droplet is for. Vorticity is a very, very important feature that we will use in shading. And basically what's happening is we can get fluid that actually is not moving too fast, but it's swirling too a lot. And if we compute the velocity of that, its velocity is not that high, but it's changing. It's doing. It's turbulent, but it's staying in the same zone. and that's called vorticity. That's what we use this attribute for. It can capture those points that are swirling a lot, and we can use this extra field or extra attribute to create some cool, interesting shading in Mantra. So we're gonna turn that on. Rest attribute, we're not going to use this. This is for adding texture coordinate. It's very slow and very complex to work with. I never used that, so not going to use it. The volume motion, this is the particle section of the flip fluid. This is the volume field, and what I'm going to change is the velocity smoothing. I'm going to lower this to try and sharpen the velocity field, basically. And there is a smoothing that that is being run inside of the sim to help reduce the explosions or particles flying away or any noise issue. And I'm gonna lower this a bit to 0.205 so it doesn't smooth the velocity field a lot. Okay, let's let me check a few more things. So there is one feature that I really like. Under the collision tab, there's this tick on collision, which is basically as the geometry gets in contact with the water, it will either stick to it or basically slide along it. And this, I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to keep the settings, and this will help with the collision. As the statue comes up, it's going to have more particles slide along the surface. This also goes in the same idea as geometry gets inside the surface or outside of the surface. The detection between the surface field and the geometry, there is a range where these two guys are going to intersect together, and right now there is an extrapolation of 0.5. I'm going to lower this to 0.5 so it's not the detection region is not too big between the two. Viscosity, we don't need any of that. Density, we don't need any of these guys. Solver, preconditioner, this is going to limit multi-threading, so we're going to turn this off, which will use a different method for preconditioning to solve the pressure projection. And this, by turning this off, it's going to use a method that is much better multi-threaded. And if you have multi-cores, if 6 or more, turning this off will definitely improve the sim time. Narrowband, we're not going to use this. The main advantage of a narrowband sim is when you have a very deep water sim. So let's say we have from here to here, and we have something coming out of the water and things like that, and only details are happening at the upper level and nothing in the center. In our example, we don't have that. It's just a very shallow water, and narrowband is actually going to slow down things quite a bit if we turn it on. If you have a shoreline that you would like to sim, the narrowband is not going to work there. But if you have something really deep, it's going to help you a lot. So it's very important to know when to use that. This is for distribution, which we're not going to use. And I think that's pretty much it for the sim. The next thing that I want to do is I want to increase the resolution of the sim. So I'm going to lower this to 0.02. And I'm going to lower the grid scale to 175. And this is going to increase the resolution of the volume field. So it's generating the points now. Good thing is it only generates them once, and then once they are imported, we're not gonna repeat this process anymore. So 41 million sounds good, and for me, for 20 millions and higher, depends on the scale for this scene. I think how big it is. That's about 30 meter, and this is about 25, I think, or 20. Yeah, 20 by 25. And I think the point count here is pretty good. We can go, for me, 20 to 100 is a high res sim, and again, it all depends on the scale. And let's see, for the grid scale, I'm going to set this to 0.7175. The fluid field, it does not get created yet. That's why we're not seeing it in here. Let's see. This is all good. This is okay. And these are, I'm going to turn off the plus Y in case there is, we hit the surface, the limit of the surface. I don't want them to bounce back, at least they would die off. And I think that's pretty much it. Go to the upper level, and I'm gonna use the dot import fields. This guy, and pop object 1. Flip object 1. Change this to flip fluids. And we need these three guys. And there is a node called, let's go up. Cool. So this is, it's going to get higher as we once we step in. There is a node called fluid compress that helps reduce the file size when we save this to disk, and it's basically going to reduce the number of points. It's gonna pack the data. So let's say we have a lot of points here, and there is a voxels inside of this area. What Houdini is going to do is say all these voxels, we're going to pack their data and optimize it so it stores one value and only the position of all these points. For example, it runs a sparse data optimization on the points as well as the volume. So it requires the surface and the velocity to be there for this node to work properly. And I'm gonna set the same particle separation as we have in the scene and the sim. This it's better to link this to the actual flip sim, and this is going to change the look of this. 1 second, once it does its thing. So you can see how it packed the particles into groups, and this is going to save disk space a lot. Okay, and then when we're going to use it, we're going to unpack certain only the parts that we need and use them. And then I'm going to cache this to disk. I'm going to cache 400 frames and let this run, and we're going to continue in the next video once this is done. Thank you guys for watching. Oh, sorry, one more thing. This I'm going to turn off this the cache here. Make sure that this is off when you submit the job. I'm also going to copy this parameter, and I'll explain why. I'm going to dive inside this flip object. Under the creation, there's this option here called allow caching. I'm going to paste relative reference and link the sim cache with this node cache. This is going to save memory a lot if we turn off caching for this, because we don't have to cache any data on this node. So make sure that you always link those two nodes, and I'm going to hit save. We'll come back in the next day. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in a bit.